Hello, students and viewers at home. I welcome you to today's teaching online from St. Charles College, Onitsha. My name is Ubamadu Nnaemeka from Computer Department. The topic we're going to be looking at today is definition of some basic items encountered in database management system. This very topic is to get you acquainted with some of the terminologies we use in database management system. So it's going to help you for our main topic in our next lesson, which will be on DBMS. Now, before we go over to the content of the lesson, let's see the specific objectives. By the end of those lessons, students, you are expected to be able to define some of the basic terminologies used in database management system. Now to the lesson content. Introduction. The data is classified into different groups and subgroups so that each group or subgroup of data can be handled separately. This data is arranged in an order so that it can be accessed very quickly as and when required. The arithmetic operations are performed on the numeric data to get the required results. For example, total marks of each student can be calculated. The data is processed to represent it in a summarized form. It means that the summary of data is prepared for top management. For example, the summary of the data of students is prepared to show the percentage of pass and fail students in an examination, and this result can be stored in a database. But before we go into the interesting stuff, that is the major topic in our last lesson, as I said before, it might be useful to get acquainted with the few of these terms that you will encounter in database management system. These terms are as first, character. A character is any letter, number, space, punctuation mark, or symbols that can be typed on a computer. The word computer, for example, consists of 8 characters. Now, when you count the number of letters that are made up of computer here, you notice that they are 8 in number. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These 8 characters made up of a word. So they have 8 word characters as computer. Also, the phrase hi there is also takes up 9 characters. Then let's count 1, 2, 3, space. This space is also a character in computer. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A full stop is also a character in computer. So 9 character takes up 9 letters here takes up a character. So that's how we count characters in computer. Each character requires 1 byte of space. So computer takes up 8 bytes, while hi there takes up 9 bytes. That is the memory size of storing each word or character in a computer. The next is data elements, also can be called a data item. This is an atomic unit of data that has precise meaning. It is made up of 1 or more characters. Any unit of data defined for processing is data element or item. For example, account number, name, address, city, etc. The next one is field. Field can also be referred as column or attribute. A field is the smallest unit of storage in a relational database. A field is part of a record and contains a single space of data for the subject of the record or one piece of information about an object. Every column has a name and a data type. In the database table illustrated below, each record contains 4 fields. I'll explain that later. Now let's go over to an attribute. An attribute is a characteristic of an entity that we need to store. An attribute is represented as a column in the table for the entity. It is also called a field. An attribute has a specific data type. Now, when you look at these two definitions, or three rather, the data element, the field, and the attribute, you notice that they have some quite sort of similarities. So, data element, field, column, attribute sometimes referred as being the same thing because they have the same word similarities in computer. So let's look at the diagram. In this diagram, we have login, operator, resolved, and durations. Now, this thing I mentioned now are what we call what? Columns in computer. Data types. This defines the type of value that can be stored in a table column. For example, if you want a column to store only integer values, this integer values is just like a number, then you can define its data type as integer. Data types listed here doesn't include all the data types. These are the most popular used data types. Every relational database has its own maximum size limit for different data types. You do not need to remember the limit. The idea is to have the knowledge of what data type to be used in a specific scenario. Common data types include, the first one we have here is what? Integer. This has to do with numbers. Used for whole numbers or non-fractional digits. Floats or floats. This has to do with decimal, used for fractional numbers. The next one is currency, used for monetary values. The next one is date, time, that date and time, used for date and time values. Another one we have here is string. This string is also can be seen as what? Varchar or text, used for variable text or alphanumeric characters. Then we have the one we call Boolean, used for on or off, 0 or 1, yes or no data type. That's when you want to consider two things, yes or no. Then you use Boolean data type. Then the next one is what? Image. It can also be called only object, used for image or picture format. Then we move over to record. This record can also be seen as row or tuple. A record is composed of fields and contains all the data about one particular person, company, or items in a database. A record can also be defined as a collection of attributes with data about one thing or entity, such as a student. Fields usually identify the records, such as a log ID in the table below. In this database table, a record contains the data for one customer supported to one customer support incident report. Record appears as rows on the database table. A record for log ID 1201242 is highlighted below. Now the next one is tuple. A tuple is a collection of attributes about a single entity instance. It is the design of a record. It usually doesn't have a name, but it is a specific collection of fields that describe one entity instance. The entity instance may be identified by one of the fields in that record, such as the student ID field. Let's know what is instance. Instant is the actual content of the database at a particular point in time. That actual content of the database at a particular point in time is what we call what? An instant. Then there is something I want to tell you here. Now, you find out that the definition of tuple is similar to that of what? Record. So both of them can be used interchangeably in terms of what? In terms of their definition. A table is a collection of rows. A database table is composed of records and fields that hold data. Tables are also called data sheets. Each table in a database holds data about a different data, but related subject. In other database systems, you may see the terms relation, file, or class. These are all equivalent to a table. A table has what is called a primary key that helps relate it to other tables. Now, when you look at this image below, you see a table. This is a set, it's just a table. A table comprises of rows and columns. Rows and what? Columns. Now, a table has what they call a primary key. The primary key is a unique identifier. Now, when you look at this log ID, you find out that this log ID is a unique value that you can use to identify an operator. So this log ID can be taken as a primary key to identify every record in a table. Now we're going to look at view. A view is an alternative way to present a table or tables. You might think of a view as a visual table. A view is usually defined in terms of one or more tables. When you create a view, you are not storing more data. You are instead creating a different way of looking at existing data. A view is a useful way to give a name to a complex query that you may have to use repeatedly. The next is relation or relation. A relation is a table that meets specific criteria. If the database is a relational database, then the tables must meet these criteria and hence be relations. So a relational database is a collection of relation and relationship. Now the next is entity. An entity is a person, place, thing, or event that we want to store information about. It is like a noun. In a relational database structure, each entity has its own table. Example, a structure of rows and columns. For instance, a structure of rows and columns like school, vehicles, personal details, payroll, etc. They are what we seen or known as what, or what we referred as what, MTT. Now, there is something I want to highlight here. You find out that relation, view, table, these three has similarities in their definition. So they can also be used interchangeably. So whenever you hear relation, view, table, or in a database, just note that they are referring to one thing. Now let's use this structure to illustrate all we have said about table, record, and field. Now when you look at this table critically, you find out that we have three columns or attributes, which these columns are the columns of row number, which is the header column, and also the column of name, which is also a header column, and the column of department. Now we have about 3 columns in this word table. Now in the other hand, we have also records. When you look by your left-hand side, we see tuple, row, record, entity, referring to same word thing. So we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 records in this word table. Now we'll go over to primary key. A primary key is an attribute or a collection of attributes that uniquely identify each row in a table. Each entity instance in a table must be unique, and so this is a way of ensuring that a primary key is usually a critical and identifying piece of data. For instance, in a table of customer names, addresses, and phone numbers, the column containing the name would most likely be the primary key because it holds the most significance. Now, another word here is what? Foreign key. A foreign key is an attribute in a child table that matches the primary key values in the parent table. Let me explain this very area. When you have a primary key in a table, which its content still remaining in another table, in that second table, the key that the primary key can use to identify the completion of the records it has in that particular first table, which is called the parent table, is the foreign key. Schema. A schema refers to the logical model or structure of a database. The physical schema is the database designed at a physical level, while the logical schema is a database designed at the logical level. This is the structure of a database. The next is query. A query is a question about a data that you want answered. For example, who are the students at City College that have GPA higher than 2.5 and live near the airport? This is just a question and it's called a query in computer. The next one is visual table. Visual table is a table that is returned from a query or a view. This is when you ask a question, then the computer uses a visual table to return the answer or respond to that query. Now the same thing as result set. It is a feedback you get when you issue a query to a database. The result set contains all the rules that satisfy your query. A result set may be empty if it finds no result. Now move over to index. An index is a data structure that a database uses to reduce the amount of time it takes to perform certain operations. An index can also be used to ensure that duplicate values don't appear where they aren't wanted. Index can also be used to identify a table row easily. The same index used to know in textbook, it is also used in computer to identify information easily. Then the next one is form. A form is on-screen way of viewing, entering, and editing data in the database. It's usually not intended to be printed out. When you're filling your form in the computer, that same form you're seeing there is the content of the database. So whatever you do in that form, it is on-screen way of viewing, editing, and entering data in the database. A report. A report is a printout of the data in a helpful way to the user. Special formatting and summary calculations are usually important. Data model. A collection of tools for describing data and its relationships. That's data model. It is just a collection of tools for describing data and its relationship. It consists of two components, structure and operations. The structure refers to the way the system structures data, or at least how the user thinks it is structured. While the operations are the facilities, tools given to the user of the DBMS to manipulate data within the database, such as curate tables, queries, forms, report, add data, retrieve the data, etc. My dear students, we have come to the end of this lesson. I believe you understood it. Now, this lesson is just to enlighten you with some of the terminologies we use in database. Remember, as I said when we were starting, that this is for you to get acquainted with the terminologies we use in database. That the main topic that we are preparing for is database management system. But before we go, I would like to evaluate you with this question. Mention and explain anything basic terms used in database management system. Answer those questions and send it to my WhatsApp contact, which is 080-639-41061. Thanks for listening and remain blessed.